All right, everybody, welcome back to Philosophy for the People. We are joined by Dr. Mark Spencer yet again. I was just complimenting Dr. Spencer on his extremely minimalist, stoic studio there. I love the simple chair and just nothing going on in the background. I'm envious. I wish that I could pare down as much as you. But good to have you on the show again, Mark. Thanks for being here.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about some of my favorite things to chat about today, of philosophy of God and philosophy of religion. You recently, very graciously, contributed to the humbly named Journal of Absolute Truth on Substack. A massive article, was so well done. It's actually the first in a series that I'm hoping to have a number of contributors be a part of the theme, 7 questions that no X can answered by an X. So you took, 7 questions no Catholic philosopher can answered by a Catholic philosopher. And you took on, it's a wide variety of objections, related to Hume and divine simplicity and immutability and responsive to prayer. It's a fantastic article. And I want to encourage people to go read that. We'll probably touch on a few of the, themes in that article here, but I want this to be kind of a more, wider, more free conversation, because people can and should go read that article. But before we dive in, it's been a while since you've been on the podcast. If you wouldn't mind, Dr. Spencer, just remind people of who you are, what you do, and what you've been working on recently.
Yeah, so I think it's been maybe 2 years since I've been on this podcast.
Been that long?
I think it has. Yeah.
Time really flies. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I teach a range of classes here: metaphysics, philosophy of God, a contemporary philosophy, history of philosophy course, a number of other classes. And I write on a range of topics. And recently I've been writing a lot on beauty. I'm working on a book on beauty as evidence for God's existence. And synthesizing together a number of different strands of the Christian philosophical tradition, but also the philosophical tradition more broadly on beauty. And historically, I've worked on a number of topics. I have a book on the nature of the human person. I have a book on Catholicism's doctrine of God. And my general approach is synthetic. I try to bring together lots of different strands of the tradition: scholasticism, the Greek fathers, personalism, phenomenology, contemporary analytic philosophy. Bring these together and try to build up a synthetic account of whatever it is I'm talking about: the human person, beauty, whatever it might be. So that's my general approach. I've written a bunch of articles on a range of topics taking that approach.
Yeah. No, excellent. Super cool. I want to explore the beauty thing with you here sooner than later. So why don't we start in that general neighborhood? Because you said you think beauty is evidence for God, and you just wrote this rather long article again for my Substack defending kind of related to the coherence of classical theism. But to your mind, what are some of the strongest motivations for classical theism? So let's talk natural theology. When you think about the existence of God, it's one thing to try and work out a model or picture of God that doesn't generate any sort of philosophical absurdities or conflict with anything that's undeniable about reality, right? But why should somebody be a classical theist in the first place? What do you think are some of the best arguments for this traditional position, Dr. Spencer?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of the classical arguments, say the 5 ways of Thomas Aquinas, I'm particularly partial to the 2nd and 4th ways, but I think that those arguments are very good. My fundamental motivation for being a classical theist, though, I think is not argumentative, but perceptual. And I try to draw this out a little bit in the article that I wrote for your Substack. I think that what's going on in these arguments for the existence of God is they are conveying to us a way of seeing the world. So seeing the world as populated by some fundamental properties. All things have certain properties. For example, all things are intelligible, and all things are good or desirable. capable of being desired. And for me, lately, the thing I'm most interested in, all things are beautiful. All things can give us some pleasure when seen. All things exhibit fittingness. Their aspects fit together in an intelligible and proportionate way that gives us pleasure when we know it. So I think we see the world as, or we can see the world as having these fundamental properties. And when we see the world as having these fundamental properties, we start to see the world as fitting together in ever broader ways. It's not just individual things that are intelligible. The entire cosmos is intelligible. It's not just individual things that are beautiful and fit together and have this splendor that gives pleasure when seen. The entire cosmos presents this fittingness. And then we can proceed in one of two ways. They're complementary ways. One is to ask, why is the world this way? And reason to an explanation, an ultimate explanation for why the world is this way. That at bottom, there is something ultimately intelligible, ultimately desirable, ultimately beautiful. That would be a sort of more argumentative way. But the other way is a perceptual way. And I think a lot of people have had this experience of the intelligibility and desirability and beauty of the world, presenting them with a personal presence. Intelligibility and desirability point to intelligence and desire and love and other properties like this. And so to encounter the cosmos as fundamentally true and good and beautiful just is to experience the presence of that which is ultimately true and good and beautiful, and an ultimate person or persons who are true, good, and beautiful. And I think it's that sort of experience, which then, of course, needs to be unpacked and defended and so forth. That is my basic motivation for being a classical theist.
Yeah. Okay. That's super interesting. I want to explore just a couple different possible approaches there. Right. So let's take the intelligibility one. Because this is one that's always spoken to me. And I guess tell me if this is how you're thinking about it. Right. So, it's sort of your basic contingency argument with a PSR, right? That things.
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. It sounds like my microphone is registering. Let's see if it's testing. Let me. There we go. I can still hear you. All great. Okay, sorry, we had a little audio hiccup, but we're back now. And I was going to ask you about the approach from intelligibility. To me, this sort of seems like your basic. What to me, the whole notion of intelligibility is like the engine behind all cosmological reasoning, right? It's this commitment to something like the principle of sufficient reason, that things, if there's a coherent question that can be asked, there is an adequate response that can be given somewhere. That doesn't mean that we always can access what the answer is. It's just a commitment that it's maybe only God has access to it, right? But intelligibility is there. And I guess the idea generally is that, hey, you look around the world and there's all these things that are intelligible, but only so far, right? They're restrictedly intelligible, as Bernard Lonergan would put it, right? They're restricted. They can answer some questions about themselves, like from their own nature, but then you hit these sets of limits, and then you start having more questions that clearly go beyond the intelligibility of those particular beings.
That's right.
Not including if we're talking about contingency, their very existence, right? So the general idea, again, I think behind all the different formulations of various contingency arguments is that, hey, to make sense of why these things exist at all, even just collectively, you have to trace back or twist up to something that is unrestrictedly intelligible, right? That it's something that if we could grasp its essence or nature, right, there would no longer be any mystery remaining at all about why it exists and why it has the characteristics that it does, right? There's this sort of ultimate point of termination, of well-foundedness to reality. And here I think is the key consideration. that reality would have to exist for all those restrictedly intelligible realities that exist. And that reality itself would have to exist in a very peculiar type of way, right? It would have to be free of all restrictions, boundaries, composition. That's a controversial one, but it seems like composition entails limitation and dependency and stuff like that, right?
Yep.
So like maybe we can't say a whole lot about this thing. Maybe we can, but we can at least start to say like what this thing cannot be, right? Right? It can't be, finite, limited, bounded, material, blah 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 blah, right? And that's the thing. That's the thing that we call God. Is this theoretical entity that's supposed to fill a functional, namely foundational role as the ultimate being, in the source of ontology and the ultimate explanation in the source of discoverability. Build that out. Is that how you're thinking about this?
Yeah.
You think that's right?
I think that's right. Yeah, and I think so. We perceive the things around us as intelligible in a limited way, right? They have that restricted intelligibility, and yet at the same time, I think we perceive intelligibility itself as an unrestricted property. That is, I can see that you are intelligible, right? I can make sense of you just knowing you to some extent. But then I see that your intelligibility, the way in which your intelligibility is finite, you point beyond yourself in that way in which contingent things do not fully explain themselves. And yet I see to be understandable, to be capable of being grasped, to have meaning, is not itself a restricted property, right? So even though it's restricted in your case, it is not in itself restricted.
Right. It's not a property that inherently entails a bound.
That's right. And I can see that just by knowing you or the pine tree or anything. I can see there's this unrestrictedness to meaning. If we can put it in sort of, I don't know, existential, experiential sort of terms, the intelligibility of the particular thing cries out for a fullness of intelligibility. It makes us want to know things in an unrestricted way.
Yes.
So we've got this sort of drive towards fully making sense of the world, understanding all things that's within each of us, but then we encounter it in the particular things themselves. They too point towards ultimate and unrestricted unintelligibility.
Yeah. So I mean, in one sense, I think that's a very swift and perhaps even quite decisive consideration if you grant that the world is fully intelligible, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But of course, there's going to be a number of skeptics like, well, maybe, all disappointment arises from improperly set expectations, right? Like maybe we just get to something and it's just restrictedly intelligible, and that's it. It's a brute fact, right? And so bummer, right? As it turns out, this drive was fundamentally misguided, right? The world is not fundamentally intelligible, thoroughly intelligible through and through. It seems like it was, but yeah, I guess we're just sort of out of luck, right?
Right. Yeah.
Do you think this is just a sort of, we reach a sort of fundamental impasse with people who hold that view, or do you think we can kind of break a deadlock there in favor of the intelligibility thesis, let's call it, right?
Yeah, I think there are strong considerations in the direction of breaking that impasse. I do think there's a sense in which the arguments for the existence of God, cosmological arguments, or these perceptual experiences that I'm talking about, pose us with a sort of choice. So I can choose to see the world as it appears to be, which is in fact intelligible and in fact pointing towards unrestricted intelligibility, or I can choose to see the world as absurd, as sort of fundamentally meaningless, in the sense of not providing ultimate meaning. Like I can go on about my day and
you can make soup and whatnot.
Sure, yeah, and build things like this computer and so forth. So it's not like the world is completely meaningless in all senses, but it's meaningless at bottom. It's absurd at bottom. There is no ultimate meaning to things. That is certainly a view a person can take on, and I think these experiences and these arguments confront us with that choice.
Right.
But I don't think it's just an arbitrary choice. It's not just a blind leap. I'm going to choose to believe in God and the world is ultimately intelligible or not. The way the world shows up is as intelligible, both in this sense of things having restricted intelligibility and in this sense of things pointing towards unrestricted and ultimate intelligibility. Things show up as participating in ultimate meaning. And so I think that the choice to believe that the world is absurd and ultimately meaningless is itself a choice to reject the way the world shows up. It's to be sort of a bad empiricist in a sense.
Yeah.
So I think like all the evidence and the way in which the world appears to us point in the direction of ultimately classical theism. But that doesn't mean that you sort of have to accept that. Like there's always this possibility of the choice in the other direction.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. This is something I've thought about a good deal from various angles, right? Because you might have to kind of circle around in different directions, but you can also say, well, okay, well, look, we have these two options, right? You call it absurdism versus classical theism, right? And I know it triggers people when I say this. I understand why it does, but like those do seem to me to exhaust the logical space of options, right? Yeah. Like at the end, I'm just going to lay my cards out. I think that's it, right? So let's just say I'm right about that. Maybe I'm not. But then it's like, well, like I would be very surprised that the world would show up this way if absurdism was true, right? So like just like using like inference to the best explanation, I think we can like be like break the deadlock, like. And that's, of course, like what many people who defend like the principle of sufficient reason do is like, in one sense, like, well, this seems to be like a principle of rationality, but it doesn't mean we can't defend it, right? We can use IBE, we can use reductios, right? If you deny this, it seems like we have like some pretty catastrophically skeptical scenario, at least like empirical skepticism or something like that. So I think you're right? It's like we're kind of at a very bottom level here, and the closer you get to the bottom, the more difficult it becomes to adjudicate certain things, right?
Yeah.
But I think there are certain moves to show that moving in one direction is almost certainly more rational, right? It seems like the other direction is just like the complete abandonment of rationality, to my mind. And you can also tell like a story, like, okay, if classical theism is true, like the drive that I even have sort of makes sense. Like, I think that God's existence would anticipate that I have this sort of drive, which again is sort of kind of left somewhat mysterious or not, doesn't have as good of a story on the absurdist view. So like minimally, I think you can build like a very powerful cumulative case in one direction. You think that's right?
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think that idea of a cumulative case, so sort of circling around things here, fits a lot with this notion that I raised a little bit in the article I wrote for you about a sort of aesthetic sense to reason. That one of the things that we do with reason, maybe the most fundamental thing that we do with reason, is we can see and make sense of wholes.
Yeah.
Where I might not be able to give a sort of absolutely demonstrative argument for every claim I want to make about that whole, but I can articulate how the different parts of that whole fit together. I call this aesthetic because I think like this is what we do when we make sense of works of art, right? If I listen to a piece of music or I look at a painting or I read a novel and I want to understand what's going on in this work of art, I sort of move back and forth between the different parts. I think about one part and I think about it in relation to another. I make sense of one character in the novel in relation to another character. So I'm sort of building up this cumulative case about the whole. And I think something similar is what's going on when we're dealing with these really fundamental sort of holistic worldview questions.
Yeah.
Sort of moving back and forth between the different aspects of the worldview, making sense of each one in relation to the others. And I mean, I think this is another reason to prefer the classical theist model to the absurdist model, because the absurdist model is basically saying, ultimately at bottom, the things don't fit together. And yet at the same time, it's trying to articulate a cumulative case about how all the things fit together. Right? I'm going to give you this total absurdist picture of the world, which is a picture of the world on which the world is fundamentally not intelligible and in which things don't fit together.
Yes.
So sort of I don't know if it's a logical contradiction, but at least a sort of performative contradiction.
Yeah, and it's hard to do this, right? Because the models are so variegated. Right. I mean, like, so on one hand, you might have somebody who's like a hardball physicalist or reductionist, and they're like, oh well, if you just give me like atomic and evolutionary theory, I can explain a whole lot, even though a lot of their explanations ultimately amount to eliminations, right? Maybe even over consciousness and like that's tough, right? Because like, does that really count, right? does that really count?
Yeah.
Others will be like, okay, like I don't want to be an eliminativist or more anti-realist, but I'm still like committed to the general naturalist paradigm. So now I'm just going to say that there's, and like I feel the force of some contingency arguments, but I'm just going to say that like some aspect or some initial stage of physical reality is necessary. Then I'm going to like toss in Platonic forms that somehow supervene on various natural states, and and I'll tell you, I've really tried. Maybe I'm just a little too dim to see like how all that stuff like work, but like to me it just seems like it's, if anything, when you start doing that, you seem to like, you know, compound the problems, right? Like at least with like the hardcore reductionists, like we have something very lean and elegant and absurd, whereas at the other time, like we still have something absurd, but now it's no longer lean or elegant. But I guess if you're committed to absurdism, like what does elegance even matter? Like who cares about elegance or ontological leanness, right? Like if you're committed to like the idea that no, we do just have brute facts, like what does it matter after that? Throw in anything you want. So I guess I don't know even what I'm getting at here. I'm just saying it's hard to adjudicate these things because it's not like it's just one model you have to work through out there. There's all sorts of different proposed alternatives that would reject classical theism, that what they're actually committed to is, could differ quite substantially, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think something important to keep in mind here is, that the question you sort of just raised, what counts as explanation, is itself somewhat subject to debate here. We're working with different models of reason, right? What counts as reasoning? We're working with different models of explanation, right? So for the sort of hardcore reductionistic physicalist to claim that sort of eliminativist arguments count as explanation, and the classical theists say no, they don't. They're just denying the very thing we tried to explain. The impasse here is in part trying to work out exactly what does count as explanation, what does count as good reasoning.
Yeah, totally. I think like minimally an explanation has to be something that removes mystery, right? Certainly not all explanations are causal, even if whenever you cite causes, you are citing an explanation.
Right.
And when I ponder and think about these eliminist proposals, they don't satisfy my intellect, right? I'll just say that, right? Which is a big reason why I turned away from those sorts of moves. But let's talk about, so I mean this will kind of relate to it. Let's talk about the beauty part, right? So this is something I don't think I've ever had much of a conversation on this podcast before about beauty. So you said that you think that beauty is evidence for this classical theistic paradigm, and when you say that something is evidence for something, I like minimally mean like, oh, this is like better anticipated by this paradigm than an alternative. So talk to us about that. What is beauty? And like, I know a lot of people want to just bring it down to a matter of like fancy or taste or something like that. It seems like you want to say it's more than that. So help us understand it, and then let's see how you try to fit it into that big picture, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. So I think about beauty in the way that the Christian philosophical tradition and classical philosophical tradition has thought about it. And there's sort of two approaches you can take to thinking about what beauty is. One is to approach it from the point of view of personal experience. So beauty is fundamentally, to use Thomas Aquinas's definition, it's that which pleases when seen. So there's sort of two components to the experience of beauty. On the one hand, it is something seen, or taken more broadly, cognized in some way. So I'm aware of it. And in the the very event of being aware of it, it gives me delight. So there's that affect. There's a cognitive component and an affective component. And the idea here is what we call beautiful is that which gives us this pleasure just upon being cognized. I don't need to possess it in any way further in order to get the delight. Right?
Yeah.
I look at the painting and I take pleasure just in seeing it. And I don't need to own it. I don't need to pull it off the wall and hold on to it. Just seeing it gives me that delight. So there's this sort of affection and cognition that are simultaneous with one another.
Sure.
And then the other approach is to take a more sort of objective approach. What is it in things that gives delight when known? And there, I think we can think about it again, sort of following the ancient Greeks and the medievals, as involving three components. So when we talk about something being beautiful, we're talking about the parts or principles or aspects of that thing fitting together, or it fits together with other things. It's like it fits together with my mind, it fits together with my affections. So there's some sort of fittingness in the thing or in its relation. Sometimes the tradition calls this proportion, but proportion understood not just in a numerical sense, but in the sense of things fitting together. There's a sort of wholeness or integrity to the beautiful. So I can see the beautiful artwork or the beautiful scene in nature as a whole, and then within that whole things fit together. Or I see it as a whole, and then that whole fits together with me or with other things. And then perhaps the most difficult to define is this idea that the tradition has of the beautiful is that which is splendid or radiant or shining. So the beautiful shows itself. It manifests itself. That's the idea there. And it manifests itself as fitting and as a whole. So those are the basic ideas of what I mean by beauty.
Yeah.
And what the tradition has meant by beauty. And I think here again, we encounter a property that's very much like the intelligibility we were talking about before. We encounter it in limited ways in particular things. But when we encounter something as beautiful, we encounter the beauty itself as something unlimited. So once again, like intelligibility or others of these basic properties of things, it points beyond itself to something that is unrestrictedly beautiful, unrestrictedly fitting, and whole, and self-manifesting or radiant. But it does it in a way that I think is a bit more intuitive than intelligibility or goodness or unity or other basic properties. So beauty has a sort of immediacy to it. It's more easily accessible, I think, to a lot of people than these other properties. And furthermore, it unites those other properties. So beauty includes within itself intelligibility and desirability or enjoyability and unity and these other fundamental properties that things have. So to encounter the beauty of something sort of just is to encounter all of those things as a perceived whole.
Yeah. So is it its own transcendental, or do you think it's an emergent one? You know, because I know this is the big controversy, right?
Yeah. So one of my colleagues suggested the name meta-transcendental. I'm kind of playing around with that right now.
Yeah.
The idea is we can distinguish out all these other basic properties that beings have, right? Every being exists, and every being is one, and it's intelligible or true, and it's desirable or good. And beauty is sort of the sense of all of those taken together. So not in a sense a transcendental on the same level as all those others, but this, again, this intuitable sense of the wholeness of a being. With all of its aspects, which then we've got to, intellectually unpack into those other properties.
Right.
I'm going to talk about it.
Okay. So a few follow-up questions and points, right? So I guess the first thing I want to get your thoughts on is how you might try to motivate this against the subjectivist, position. Yeah, beauty has nothing to do with anything beyond our minds. It's all in the eye of the beholder. What's beautiful to one person's not beautiful to another. Sort of like a parallel to the argument for moral disagreement, right? Beauty disagreement, right? It seems like people disagree about what's beautiful. So let's get your thoughts on that point first.
Sure. Yeah. And when I teach this class I teach on philosophy of art and beauty, I spend like the whole first third of the course on this question, because I think it is.
It's probably the most significant one. Yeah, totally. Yeah,
so. Yeah, and the one students are most worried about.
And not only that, I just want to highlight, like, even a lot of people that are moral realists who think that morality is not just a matter of taste or opinion, still seem to like not go that same route with beauty a lot of times, right? So there's something, I don't know, is there something particularly more difficult about it with respect to beauty? Yeah, give us your thoughts.
Yeah. I don't know if there's something more difficult about it. It maybe feels more subjective, precisely because the experience of beauty is this appearance to me which delights me. So it has a sort of subjective or personal individual feel to it in the experience of beauty. But I guess I want to make a couple of points here. So one is, I don't think anybody actually really thinks that beauty is entirely in the eye of the beholder.
Grand Canyon, pile of dog poop.
That's right. Yeah. So
really,
when people make these sorts of claims, it's generally sort of in the context of debate or disagreement about, like, what artworks do I like? What
Megadeth or Metallica? Which one?
Right. Yeah. But when people make claims about beauty, I think they take themselves, when they're outside of the context of these debates, they take themselves to making a claim about the thing itself, right? Like, listen to this piece of music; it's so beautiful.
Yeah,
right? I say to you, and yeah, you might disagree with me, but I'm not just making a claim about my opinion. I'm making a claim about the work itself, right? And if you don't see it, I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, why don't you see that this is beautiful? So the fact that we disagree does not mean that when I make the claim about beauty, I don't take myself to be making a claim about the thing itself.
Yes.
So I think in general, sort of experientially, outside of philosophy debates, we take ourselves to be making claims about the things themselves. When I say to my wife, "You're beautiful," I'm not just saying, like, subjectively to me, my personal opinion.
It's about you, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
I think that's right. I think just at the basic level, common language, common thought. That seems right to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And then second consideration is, I think we need to make a distinction between the beautiful things and the beauty of the beautiful things. So even if we disagree about which things have that property, beauty, which on my view, everything's got it, so we shouldn't disagree about that. But if we disagree about, like, the relative amounts that they have, or if we deny that beauty is a transcendental in any sense, and we say only some things have it, we might disagree about which things have that property, but I don't think we're generally disagreeing about what the property is. So if we define beauty, I don't think anyone's going to deny that beauty is what pleases when seen. We might disagree about the feel of the pleasure or something like that, but in general, we're going to agree the beautiful is that which pleases when seen. I think in general, we're going to agree about those basic properties, that beauty involves some sort of aspect of things fitting together and a sense of wholeness and of the uniqueness and individuality and integrity of the beautiful thing. So if we can define the property beauty, I think here we get a lot of objectivity as well. And then last, I think a lot of times when people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, they're restricting themselves entirely to sensory beauty. But we have this experience of beauty in a lot more cases than sensory beauty, say the beauty of artworks or the beauty of nature. Mathematicians frequently talk about proofs and equations being beautiful,
right?
Sense of pleasure when seen. And then when they just define what does that mean to call a proof or an equation or a theory beautiful, it's in terms of those basic properties again. We often talk about moral acts being beautiful, right? That was a beautiful thing you did. That was a beautiful act of generosity. And here I think there's a lot less pull towards subjectivism. So one could even grant, these moral realists who are also kind of aesthetic relativists, you could grant maybe at the most fundamental, basic, low level aesthetic beauty or sensory beauty, maybe there's it's in the eye of the beholder. I don't want to grant that, but you could and still grant that beauty is objective on these higher levels.
Yeah, and I also want to say at that lower level is, I gave the Grand Canyon and dog poop example as a kind of extreme case, but like I think it shows that there is an ordering that is conceptually possible. It doesn't mean that the ordering is always going to be easy, right?
Yeah.
In some case, it might be extremely difficult to order, and that's where a lot of the difficulty comes in. But like, it does seem like an ordering is really conceptually possible there, right? Then yeah, and then I guess the picture is okay. In one sense, like you should try to let data determine the theory, but it's also not entirely unreasonable that theory can sometimes determine how you interpret the data, right?
Oh, sure.
So like maybe you're a little bit torn about this, but if you've got a big picture that you think is otherwise well motivated and can cause you to interpret the data, this one in like an objective way, like classic, well, then why not go with that, right?
That's right.
And I would say the same thing with like people who are torn like on arguments for realism and anti-realism, right? Mm-hmm. You might be like, oh man, I don't like, I have this, my intuition is like I'm a moral realist. I don't know how to answer all these arguments decisively. I'm not totally, convinced by the other side. But hey, look, classical theism has a nice paradigm here where you can, ground morality, if you will, in a certain action theory related to essences and teleology and integrative unity. And so like it gives you a really nice theory that can help you to interpret the data in a realist way.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I have some thoughts about that. Like you don't always have to just stay like on the data. You can look again at the whole and say, okay, from my perspective, the whole, how could this part fit? And is it plausible to interpret the part in that way to help, form the coherence of the whole?
That's right. Yeah. And I think, to sort of shift that into a kind of more perceptual aesthetic register, I think that's been my experience thinking through beauty. And I think it's the experience of a lot of people in the classical tradition thinking about beauty. We start by perceiving beauty, here in the world, and it feels kind of subjective and maybe sort of purely physical. And a lot of times it's sort of bound up with lots of other responses to things, desires to possess things or sexual reactions to things or what have you. And we sort of purify this sense, like what's really going on in the experience of beauty itself, setting all those other experiences aside. And then we might sort of take that as one of many pieces of evidence, sort of reasoning up to the existence of God, who we now think about as that which is not just intelligible itself and desirable itself, but also beautiful itself. But then we sort of work our way back down, right? Have the idea of God as the source of everything. Now I interpret those beautiful things in a new way, and then that reinforces my thoughts about God. And we have this sort of moving back and forth between a
virtuous circle, right? Yeah,
virtuous circle, where the more I know about one, it helps me better see the other, and I come to see the world as, again, a whole. I come to see the world, the whole of reality, God and creatures taken all together, as a sort of beautiful, fitting whole.
Yeah, I think that's an important point about, I guess, philosophical methodology, right? I mean, sometimes people think like, I don't know how many people actually still think this, but there's some at least, right? Like you have to like give a demonstrative, deductive argument for everything. And that doesn't seem how we operate on a day-to-day basis, right? We often take these loops and these circles, right? And maybe you've got all sorts of reasons that you think are very strong for classical theism, but you're kind of like stuck on the beauty thing. But then I would say, no, like classical theism gives you very good reason to interpret beauty along these particular lines.
That's right.
I think, right?
Yep.
And then you just got to show that fits with the other facts about, say something about evolution or whatever. I never think that's a serious issue, right? But you want to say something about it, right? And bring out some just so stories. Like philosophers can tell just so stories, right? If scientists can tell just so stories, certainly philosophers can tell just so stories, right? That's I like this because you say you're a syncretist, but I really like your kind of holistic approach to doing philosophy as well. I think there's a lot to be said about that. So like let's talk about some like the other data then that you think is like we've hit on beauty and we've hit on intelligibility. What else? What else do you think is like a strong indication or strong evidence for that moves you? You know, it doesn't have to necessarily move everybody else for classical theism. Yep.
Yeah. So this is something again that I touch on in the piece I wrote for you. The experience of persons. So sometimes we think about like consciousness, right? Like consciousness really can't be explained fully and exhaustively by physical things, but it's contingent in many cases, right? Like that I am a conscious being is a contingent fact, and it needs explanation, right? So we reason from the existence of consciousness to the existence of an ultimate consciousness, right? God, who creates other consciousnesses. But I think sort of going more holistically, again, the experience of other persons, not just other consciousnesses or other minds, but other free, intelligent wholes who are conscious, but are not just their consciousness.
Right.
So I think I think that's a strong consideration for me for favoring a theist view over a naturalist view, that the world is populated by persons who are these, on my view, irreducible wholes, but also need an explanation.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Personal.
Yeah, no, I like that, because the idea of a sort of irreducible whole might give an edge in a certain context, right? So I think there's been a number, I don't know how many, but certainly a number of naturalistic thinkers who will essentially concede what you said, like, yeah, consciousness is a real problem, right? If you're a physicalist.
Yeah.
So what do? They try to be a naturalist but no longer a physicalist, and they might take up like something like panpsychism, right? And the idea is, rather than, consciousness is this, kind of coming out of this qualitative abyss, if you will, right?
Yeah.
They just push it back down to the fundamental level, right? So, in a sense, this makes a lot of sense, right? Sure, because now you're not getting something from nothing, like, okay, and theists are sort of doing the same thing. It's like, theist is reductionist in the sense that, like, there's nothing in this order that cannot be reduced to the most fundamental order in an infinitely more splendid way, right? There's nothing greater at this level than the more. So it's sort of the reverse of a reduction of like a physicalist reductionist, right? So I think like the panpsychists, or like the intuition here is generally correct.
Yeah.
But then they have they still have these construction problems of building up a person, these binding problems, right? Of these from proto-consciousness or what have you. So talk that a little bit. Do you think that focusing on the person as a irreducible whole,
that's right,
can move you beyond even that?
That's right. Yeah. So when I encounter another person, especially when I encounter another person through love or friendship, right, in these sort of deep interpersonal ways, I experience the other person as a unique whole, an irreducible whole, to use the scholastic language, an incommunicable whole, a whole that cannot become part of something larger than itself, that entirely belongs to itself and determines itself, governs itself, and reveals itself. So that's the experience of personhood, I think. Right. So I encounter you as this whole, right? You're not just a bunch of little bits of consciousness, a bunch of, thoughts over here and feelings over here that somehow get stuck together. I experience you as a single self-manifesting whole. But you're also contingent, right? You need not have existed. And so I need an explanation for your existence, which cannot be just a material explanation, and also cannot be just a mental explanation, because you are this irreducible whole. And so then I think we can reason from that to the existence of an ultimate personal whole, which creates you as person.
Yeah. So the idea, this is interesting, right? Because I think this is, for me, another bit of evidence, right? The idea not just the idea, I think the obvious reality of instances where they're of holism, right? Where parts depend upon the wholes.
Yep.
I mean, biological organisms, persons are the most, I think, clear example,
Yeah.
right? Where these sort of like microphysical reductionists just do not go through, right? Because to me that means, okay, to make sense of these holes, you really kind of got to get like a sort of a thicker metaphysics going on, right? Like form and matter and essence and existence and stuff like that. And things get a little tricky here because, like, I think that like some of my parts are dependent upon my cells and stuff like that. Like clearly there's an integrated unity here where they derive their nature and function by being part of me, right? There's nothing else they could be a part of, right? I am still, like, as a whole, metaphysically downstream from certain metaphysical constituents or components, right? Form and matter and essence and existence. And it's at that level that I think we begin to like look for an explanation or unifier of those sorts of constituents, right? And if we're talking about contingency, traditionally contingency is explained by the real distinction between these kind of deeper constituents or components. So to me, it's like, okay, what am I getting at here? I'm saying, well, to make sense of where there's a real holism, it seems like we need this thicker, richer sort of ontology or metaphysics. But once that's online, unless again we're just going to be comfortable with a bunch of bruteness,
right?
That's what seems to like push back to that unrestricted.
That's right.
Whole.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, we've got a sort of pattern of reasoning here. Goes back to Plato, and then has been developed in all sorts of interesting ways by the tradition after that. That we encounter various fundamental properties, various fundamental features of reality, which are restricted or limited here, but that present themselves when we consider the properties as such as unrestricted in themselves. So the limited instances here point us towards their unrestricted version. And I think we did that earlier with intelligibility and beauty. So we have sort of limited intelligibility here. It points to unrestricted intelligibility. We've got limited form of all kinds here, and that points to unrestricted, unlimited form. We've got limited existence here, limited essence here, and that points to unrestricted essence and existence. So I mean, I think that the sort of pattern of reasoning here, limited personhood here, unrestricted personhood there. So I think, we've got sort of just instances of the same kind of reasoning. The limited properties of this finite world point towards unlimited instances, unlimited versions.
And importantly, like, not all properties are going to point to an unlimited instance, right? So, I mean, like, I don't think there's any like curiosity always entails a bound, right? Like, you have to be limited with respect to knowledge, right? So it's only going to be like certain very special sorts of properties, right? That could have a limit case instance, as I like to think about it, right? Like power, knowledge, personhood, beauty, and stuff like that. And that's sort of what has traditionally been the idea between the divine mode of these perfections all coinciding, right?
Right. I mean, we've got the classic distinction of the pure and the impure or mixed perfections. That certain perfections in their very content do not require restriction. And the limited versions present themselves as, to use the classic language, participations or sharings in the unlimited version. And so again, I think there's a sort of perceptual aspect of it as well. Like, I see unrestricted intelligibility through the limited intelligibility that I encounter in things. It acts as a sort of image or icon of the unrestricted version. But we can also reason from the one to the other in a more or less deductive fashion.
Okay, so there's one more thing I wanna discuss with you, Dr. Spencer, and it's funny because you wrote this rather mammoth article, and I realized afterwards, we didn't include, the one that always gets brought up, the problem of evil. Now, in a sense, we did, because you talked about the problem of hell,
right?
So in one sense, that's like the sort of like, the maybe even the toughest aspect of the problem in a sense, right? And I feel like almost anything that one could say about that could, maybe not everything, but a lot of it could be said in the general problem of evil, or different formulations of it. So I'll encourage people to go read that for your response on that in particular. But we've been talking about features of the world and, patterns of experience that count as evidence towards God. But obviously, I mean, like the big one that people have always thought counts as strong evidence against God are the patterns of suffering, the patterns of evil in experience. I don't expect you to be exhaustive on this because it's an exhausting topic, right? But I'd love to at least get your kind of initial thoughts of how you think that fits into the whole. And I guess even before you get to that, like, what's your initial stance on it, right? I mean, there's weaker and stronger stances. The weaker stance is like, well, I've got this whole that explains everything so well, and I can at least get evil to not break the entire whole, right? Like I can fit it in there. It's kind of at tension, but since everything else works so well together, it doesn't cause me to want to abandon everything. On the other side, even stronger stance would be people who think that the very particular patterns or distributions of suffering evil somehow actually evidence towards God. I just be curious, like, where you fall on that. Obviously, you don't think it refutes classical theism because you wouldn't be a classical theist. So you have to think it fits to some extent.
Yeah.
I'm curious how well you think it fits and how you think about it in general. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of these tough problems, I go back and forth in lots of different ways and am unsettled in many different ways. But I think my general position is that the existence of evil is evidence for God's existence in an indirect sort of way.
Yeah.
So we've got this sort of classical view, and it's articulated in a number of ways throughout the tradition, that the experience of evil is always parasitic on the experience of good. And so this gets articulated by people like St. Augustine as the privation theory of evil, right? That evil is a lack of goodness. Even if you don't want to go that far, you can have other versions on which it's a sort of deformation of goodness
or misalignment of something like that, right? Yeah.
It always presupposes goodness in some way. It's a sort of misfired version of goodness, if you will, and that we are not able to encounter something as evil, understand it as evil, experience it as evil, except on the basis of a more fundamental experience of goodness. So sometimes this gets presented in a sort of quasi-Manichaean way, as if like you can't know what's good unless you know what's evil. And I think that's just not our experience. In fact, we encounter goodness, we encounter the desirability of things directly, and we encounter evil parasitic upon that. Now, this is not a causal explanation of why there is evil, or a theodicy or defense of why God allows evil.
Right.
But it's a sort of metaphysical account of why ever there is evil, however it came into creation. It presupposes goodness, which itself presupposes ultimate goodness, God. So that's a sort of first step.
Yeah, a series of necessary conditions, let's say, right? Yeah.
And I think that first step, I take it as a sort of undercutting the force of the problem of evil, which is evil as evidence against God's existence. And so this undercutting move is to say you couldn't even talk about evil, you couldn't even recognize something as evil unless there were goodness, and there couldn't be goodness unless there was God. So at the very beginning here, evil is not evidence against God's existence. Now then we have to go further to say, why does God allow evil, or where did evil come from, or things like that. But I think if we have that sort of initial undercutting move, we at least remove a lot of the force of the problem of evil and allow us to reframe how we think about evil. Now we're trying to understand it in the context of a cosmos that is grounded ultimately in ultimate goodness. And then in terms of explaining why there is evil, I think about that a lot in terms of some sort of version of the free will defense. That evil came about through the free choices of persons, human or superhuman,
angelic, demonic, right? Yeah.
And this is why there is evil and suffering in the world. And since I have this very strong view of the freedom of created persons, where God does not determine the content of free persons' choices, I think God is not sort of specifying these acts, decreeing in advance what these free persons are going to do, even permissively. Rather, God allows free persons to do what they're going to do, but always has a sort of covenantal commitment to creation to ultimately draw what is best out of these evil choices.
So for people who want to dive a little bit further into that, that was one of the libertarian freedom and the divine universal causality and providence is one of the questions you have a good solid go out in that Substack article too, right?
Yeah.
A lot of interesting metaphysical questions there, but that's in your sort of theoretical toolkit that you have those commitments, right? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, excellent. Well, this has been really great, Dr. Spencer. I want to encourage people again to go read your excellent guest contribution. I'm going to link that over. I'll link that below so people can go to the Substack and check that out. It's a really great resource. I think people will not only enjoy reading it themselves, but they'll probably find good reason to pass it along to others as well. Please do that. In the meantime, until next time, I should say, what else are you working on? What other projects do you have any coming out soon? Any ideas? And then how can people keep up with you and your work in general?
Yeah. So like I said before, I'm working on this book on beauty. That's a bit of a long-term project that probably won't be done for another year or two.
Yep.
In the meantime, I'm working on a paper right now on spiritual perception, these sort of perceptual experiences of God in relation to phenomenology and techniques developed in the phenomenological movement. And I'm also working on a paper on the procession of the Holy Spirit, defending the filioque. And
very cool.
Yeah. And then I'm teaching a graduate seminar on sacrifice, and my notes for that I think will eventually become a book. So I'll be teaching that this next year. So yeah, those are the things I'm working on right now. I've got an academia page. Maybe you can link that.
Absolutely.
I have all my papers there. And I write a Substack, Living with Lady Philosophy, where I sort of give dry runs of ideas that are not sort of worked up into full academic style yet.
That's what Substack's for. It's the first, your very first rough draft, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I co-write that with my wife, and those are places where you can keep up with my my work. And please share my email. I'm always happy to hear from people. If people have questions or objections or are angry about something I said, please reach out.
Yeah, go. Excellent. Well, appreciate your time and your very thoughtful considerations here, Dr. Spencer. If the gentle listener, you like what you see and hear, please do like, share, subscribe, and we'll catch all of you on the next episode. Bye-bye.